Francis Xavier, S.J., born Francisco de Jasso y Azpilicueta, was a Roman Catholic missionary born in Xavier, Kingdom of Navarre, and co-founder of the Society of Jesus. He was a study companion of Saint Ignatius of Loyola and one of the first 7 Jesuits who took vows of poverty and chastity at Montmartre, in 1534. He led an extensive mission into Asia, mainly in the Portuguese Empire of the time. He was influential in evangelization work, most notably in India. He also ventured into Japan, Borneo, the Maluku Islands, and other areas which had, until then, not been visited by Christian missionaries. In these areas, being a pioneer and struggling to learn the local languages in the face of opposition, he had less success than he had enjoyed in India. It was a goal of Xavier to extend his missionary preaching to China, but he died in Shangchuan Island shortly before doing so. Early life. Francis Xavier was born in the castle of Xavier, in the Kingdom of Navarre, on April 7, 1506 according to a family register. He was born to an aristocratic family of the Kingdom of Navarre, the youngest son of Juan de Jasso, Privy Councillor to King John III of Navarre, and do plus or minus a Maria de Azpilicueta y Azores, sole heiress of 2 noble Navarrese families. He was thus related to the great theologian and philosopher Martír de Azpilicueta. Notwithstanding different interpretations on his first language, no evidence suggests that Xavier's mother tongue was other than Basque, as stated by himself and confirmed by the sociolinguistic environment of the time. In 1512, under Ferdinand the Catholic as king of the first political unit referred to as Spain, joint Spanish troops from both the Crown of Castile and the Crown of Aragon commanded by Federica Alvarez de Toledo, 2nd Duke of Alba, first invaded partially the Kingdom of Navarre. 3 years later, Francis further died when Francis was only 9 years old. In 1516, Francis' brothers participated in a failed Navarrese-French attempt to expel the Spanish invaders from the kingdom, and the Spanish Castilian kingdom's governor Cardinal Cisneros ordered to confiscate the family lands, demolish the outer wall, the gates and 2 towers of the family castle, and fill in the moat. In addition, the height of the keep was reduced in half. Only the family residence inside the castle was left. In 1522, a brother of Xavier is found along with another 200 Navarrese staging dogged but failed resistance against the Castilian Count of Miranda in Amaya, Baston, the last Navarre's territorial position south of the Pyrenees. For the following years with his family, till he left for studies in Paris in 1525, Francis' life in the Kingdom of Navarre, then partially occupied by Spain, was surrounded by a war that lasted over 18 years. Ending with the Kingdom of Navarre being partitioned into 2 territories, and the King of Navarre and some loyalists abandoning the south and moving to the northern part of the Kingdom of Navarre. In 1525, Francis went to study at the Collège E. Saint-Barbe in Paris. In 1530 he received the degree of Master of Arts, and afterwards taught Aristotelian philosophy at Beauvais College. He met Saint Ignatius of Loyola, who became his faithful companion, and Pierre Favre at Saint-Barbe. While at the time he seemed destined for academic success, Xavier turned to a life of Catholic missionary service. Ignatius is said to have posed the question, what will it profit a man to gain the whole world, and lose his own soul? Together with Loyola and 5 others, he founded the Society of Jesus, on August 15, 1534, in a small chapel in Montmartre. They made vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and also vowed to convert the Muslims in the Middle East. Francis went, with the rest of the members of the newly papal-approved Jesuit order, to Venice to be ordained to the priesthood, which took place on June 24, 1537. Towards the end of October, the 7 companions reached Bologna, where they worked in the local hospital. After that, he served for a brief period in Rome as Ignatius' secretary. Leaving Rome in 1540, Francis took with him a breviary, a catechism, and a Latin book written by the Croatian humanist Marko Marilija that had become popular in the Counter-Reformation. According to a 1549 letters of F. Balthazar Gago in Goa, it was the only book that Francis read or studied. Missionary work. Francis Xavier was the first Jesuit missionary. Francis devoted much of his life to missions in Asia, after being requested by King John III of Portugal to travel to Portuguese India, where the king believed that Christian values were eroding among the Portuguese. After successive appeals to the Pope asking for missionaries for the East Indies under the Padroado Agreement, John III was encouraged by Diogo de Xavier, rector of the College e St. Barbe, to recruit the newly graduated youngsters that would establish the Society of Jesus. Francis Xavier moved mainly in four centers: Malacca, Amboina and Ternate, Japan, and China. His growing information about new places indicated to him that he had to go to what he understood were centers of influence for the whole region. China loomed large from his days in India. Japan was particularly attractive because of its culture. For him, these areas were interconnected. They could not be evangelized separately. Goa and India. He left Lisbon on April 7, 1541, Xavier's 35th birthday, along with two other Jesuits and the new Viceroy Martim Afonso de Souza, on board the Santiago. As he departed, Francis was given a brief from the Pope appointing him Apostolic Nuncio to the East. From August until March 1542 he remained in Portuguese Mozambique, and arrived in Goa, then capital of Portuguese India, on May 6, 1542, 13 months after leaving Lisbon. Following quickly on the great voyages of discovery, the Portuguese had established themselves at Goa 30 years earlier. Francis' primary mission, as ordered by King John III, was to restore Christianity among the Portuguese settlers. The Christian population had churches, clergy, and a bishop, but many of the Portuguese were ruled by ambition, avarice, revenge, and debauchery. There were a few preachers but no priests beyond the walls of Goa. To meet this challenging situation, Xavier decided that he must begin by instructing the Portuguese themselves in the principles of faith, and gave much of his time to the teaching of children. His mornings were usually spent in tending and comforting the distressed in hospital and prison. After that, he walked through the streets ringing a bell to summon the children and servants to catechism. He was invited to head St. Paul's College, a pioneer seminary for the education of secular priests that became the first Jesuit headquarters in Asia. Xavier soon learned that along the Pearl Fishery coast, which extends from Cape Comorin on the southern tip of India to the island of Manao, off Ceylon, there was a jati of people called Paravas, many of whom had been baptized 10 years before, merely to please the Portuguese, who had helped them against the Moors, but remained uninstructed in the faith. Accompanied by several native clerics from the seminary at Goa, he set sail for Cape Comorin in October 1542. First he set himself to learn the language of the Paravas. He taught those who had already been baptized, and preached to those who weren't. His efforts with the high caste Brahmins remained unavailing. He devoted almost 3 years to the work of preaching to the people of southern India, converting many, and reaching in his journeys even the island of Ceylon. Many were the difficulties and hardships which Xavier had to encounter at this time, sometimes because the Portuguese soldiers, far from seconding his work, hampered it by their bad example and vicious habits. He built nearly 40 churches along the coast, including St. Stephen's Church, Coimbatore, mentioned in his letters dated 1544. During this time, he was able to visit the tomb of St. Thomas the Apostle in Mylapore, then in Portuguese India. He set his sights eastward in 1545 and planned a missionary journey to Makassar on the island of Celebes. As the first Jesuit in India, Francis had difficulty achieving much success in his missionary trips. His successors, such as de Nobili, Matteo Ricci, and Barry, attempted to convert the noblemen first as a means to influence more people, while Francis had initially interacted most with the lower classes. Indonesia. In the spring of 1545 Xavier started for Portuguese Malacca. He labored there for the last months of that year. About January 1546, Xavier left Malacca and went to the Maluku Islands, where the Portuguese had some settlements, and for a year and a half he preached the gospel to the inhabitants of Ambon Island, where he stayed until mid-June. He then visited other Maluku Islands including Ternate, Baranura, and Morotai. Shortly after Easter 1546, he returned to Ambon Island and later Malacca. Japan. In Malacca in December 1547, Francis Xavier met a Japanese man named Anjira. Anjira had heard of Francis in 1545 and had travelled from Kagoshima to Malacca with the purpose of meeting with him. Having been charged with murder, Anjira had fled Japan. He told Francis extensively about his former life and the customs and culture of his beloved homeland. Anjiro helped Xavier as a mediator and translator for the mission to Japan that now seemed much more possible. Anjira became the first Japanese Christian and adopted the name of Paulo de Santa Fe. In January 1548 Francis returned to Goa to attend to his responsibilities as superior of the mission there. The next 15 months were occupied with various journeys and administrative measures. He left Goa on April 15, 1549, stopped at Malacca and visited Canton. He was accompanied by Anjiro, 2 other Japanese men, the Father Cosme de Torres and Brother Joe Poundo Fernandez. He had taken with him presents for the King of Japan since he was intending to introduce himself as the Apostolic Nuncio. Europeans had already come to Japan. The Portuguese had landed in 1543 on the island of Tanegashima, where they introduced the first firearms to Japan. From Amboina, he wrote to his companions in Europe, "I asked a Portuguese merchant, a Euro who had been for many days in Anjira, a Euro unregistered trademark country of Japan, to give me a Euro some information on that land and its people from what he had seen and heard a Euro. All the Portuguese merchants coming from Japan tell me that if I go there I shall do great service for God our Lord, more than with the pagans of India, for they are a very reasonable people." Francis Xavier reached Japan on July 27, 1549, with Anjiro and 3 other Jesuits, but he was not permitted to enter any port his ship arrived at until August 15, when he went ashore at Kagoshima, the principal port of the province of Satsuma on the island of Kyushu. As a representative of the Portuguese king, he was received in a friendly manner. Shimazaki Takahisa, daimyo of Satsuma, gave a friendly reception to Francis on September 29, 1549, but in the following year he forbade the conversion of his subjects to Christianity under penalty of death. Christians in Kagoshima could not be given any catechism in the following years. The Portuguese missionary Pedro de Alca equal or more than section over would later write in 1554. In Canjoxima, the first place Father Master Francisco stopped at, there were a good number of Christians, although there was no one there to teach them. The shortage of laborers prevented the whole kingdom from becoming Christian. He was hosted by Anjiro's family until October 1550. From October to December 1550, he resided in Yamaguchi. Shortly before Christmas, he left for Kyoto but failed to meet with the emperor. He returned to Yamaguchi in March 1551, where he was permitted to preach by the daimyo of the province. However, lacking fluency in the Japanese language, he had to limit himself to reading aloud the translation of a catechism. Francis was the first Jesuit to go to Japan as a missionary. He brought with him paintings of the Madonna and the Madonna and Child. These paintings were used to help teach the Japanese about Christianity. There was a huge language barrier as Japanese was unlike other languages the missionaries had previously encountered. For a long time Francis struggled to learn the language. Having learned that evangelical poverty had not the appeal in Japan that it had in Europe and in India, he decided to change his method of approach. Hearing after a time that a Portuguese ship had arrived at a port in the province of Bungo in Kyushu and that the prince there would like to see him, Xavier now set out southward. The Jesuit, in a fine cassock, surplice, and stole, was attended by 30 gentlemen and as many servants, all in their best clothes. 5 of them bore on cushions valuable articles, including a portrait of Our Lady and a pair of velvet slippers, these not gifts for the prince, but solemn offerings to Xavier, to impress the onlookers with his eminence. Handsomely dressed, with his companions acting as attendants, he presented himself before Oshindono, the ruler of Negat, and as a representative of the great kingdom of Portugal offered him the letters and presents, a musical instrument, a watch, and other attractive objects which had been given him by the authorities in India for the emperor. For 45 years the Jesuits were the only missionaries in Asia, but the Franciscans also began proselytizing in Asia as well. Christian missionaries were later forced into exile, along with their assistants. Some were able to stay behind, However, Christianity was then kept underground as to not be persecuted. The Japanese people were not easily converted. Many of the people were already Buddhist or Shinto. Francis tried to combat the disposition of some of the Japanese that a God who had created everything, including evil, could not be good. The concept of hell was also a struggle. The Japanese were bothered by the idea of their ancestors living in hell. Despite Francis' different religion, he felt that they were good people, much like Europeans, and could be converted. Xavier was welcomed by the Shingon monks since he used the word Dainichi for the Christian God, attempting to adapt the concept to local traditions. As Xavier learned more about the religious nuances of the word, he changed to Deus from the Latin and Portuguese Deus. The monks later realized that Xavier was preaching a rival religion and grew more aggressive towards his attempts at conversion. With the passage of time, his sojourn in Japan could be considered somewhat fruitful as attested by congregations established in Hirado, Yamaguchi and Bungo. Xavier worked for more than 2 years in Japan and saw his successor Jesuits established. He then decided to return to India. Historians debate the exact path he returned by, but from evidence attributed to the captain of his ship, he may have traveled through Tanijima and Minato, and avoided Kagoshima because of the hostility of the daimyo. During his trip, a tempest forced him to stop on an island near Guangzhou, China, where he saw the rich merchant Diogo Pereira, an old friend from Cochin, who showed him a letter from Portuguese being held prisoners in Guangzhou asking for a Portuguese ambassador to talk to the Chinese emperor in their favor. Later during the voyage, he stopped at Malacca on December 27, 1551, and was back in Goa by January 1552. On April 17 he set sail with Diogo Pereira, leaving Goa on board the Santa Cruz for China. He introduced himself as Apostolic Nuncio and Pereira as Ambassador of the King of Portugal. Shortly thereafter, he realized that he had forgotten his testimonial letters as an Apostolic Nuncio. Back in Malacca, he was confronted by the capital Pound Oalvaro de Atayada da Gama, who now had total control over the harbour. The capital Poundo refused to recognize his title of nuncio, asked Pereira to resign from his title of ambassador, named a new crew for the ship and demanded the gifts for the Chinese emperor be left in Malacca. In late August 1552, the Santa Cruz reached a Chinese island of Shangchuan, 14 km away from the southern coast of mainland China, near Teshan, Guangdong, 200 km southwest of what later became Hong Kong. At this time, he was only accompanied by a Jesuit student, an Alvaro Ferreira, a Chinese man called Anticube Nio and a Malabar servant called Christopher. Around mid-November he sent a letter saying that a man had agreed to take him to the mainland in exchange for a large sum of money. Having sent back a Alvaro Ferreira, he remained alone with Anticube Nio. He died at Shangchuan from a fever on December 3, 1552, while he was waiting for a boat that would agree to take him to mainland China. Burials and relics. He was first buried on a beach at Shangchuan Island, Teshan, Guangdong. His incorrupt body was taken from the island in February 1553 and was temporarily buried in St. Paul's Church in Portuguese Malacca on March 22, 1553. An open grave in the church now marks the place of Xavier's burial. Pereira came back from Goa, removed the corpse shortly after April 15, 1553, and moved it to his house. On December 11, 1553, Xavier's body was shipped to Goa. The body is now in the Basilica of Bom Jesus in Goa, where it was placed in a glass container encased in a silver casket on December 2, 1637. The right forearm, which Xavier used to bless and baptize his converts, was detached by Superior General Claudio Acquaviva in 1614. It has been displayed since in a silver reliquary at the main Jesuit church in Rome, Il Gesuito I. Another of Xavier's arm bones was brought to Macau, where it was kept in a silver reliquary. The relic was destined for Japan, but religious persecution there persuaded the church to keep it in Macau's Cathedral of St. Paul. It was subsequently moved to St. Joseph's and in 1978 to the Chapel of St. Francis Xavier on Koloan Island. More recently the relic was moved to St. Joseph's Seminary and the Sacred Art Museum. In 2006, on the 500th anniversary of his birth, the Xavier tomb monument and chapel on the Shangchuan Island, in ruins after years of neglect under communist rule in China, was restored with the support from the alumni of Huayan College, a Jesuit high school in Hong Kong. Veneration, Beatification and Canonization. Francis Xavier was beatified by Paul V on October 25, 1619, and was canonized by Gregory XV on March 12, 1622, at the same time as Ignatius Loyola. Pius XI proclaimed him the patron of Catholic missions. His feast day is December 3. Pilgrimage centers. Goa, St. Francis Xavier's relics are kept in a silver casket, elevated inside the Bom Jesus Basilica, and are exposed generally every 10 years, but this is discretionary. The last exposition was held in 2004 from November 21, 2004, till January 2, 2005. It was the 16th exposition to be held in succession. The 17th Solemn Exposition of the Sacred Relics will be held this year in 2014, beginning from November 22 and concluding on January 4, 2015. Relics of St. Francis Xavier are also found in the Espiritu Santo Church, Marga in Sanv Francisco Xavier Igates, Batpal, Canacona, Goa, and at St. Francis Xavier Chapel, Porte, Panjim. Other places, other pilgrimage centers include St. Francis Xavier's birthplace in Navarre, Church of Il Gesù, Rome, Malacca, Sanchon, etc. In Magdalena de Quino and Sonora, Mexico, in the Temple of Santa Maria Magdalena, there is a statue of San Francisco Xavier, an important historical figure for both Sonora and the neighboring U.S. state of Arizona. The statue is said to be miraculous and is the object of pilgrimage for many of the region. Novena of Grace. The Novena of Grace is a popular devotion to Francis Xavier, typically prayed either on the 9 days before December 3, or on March 4 through March 12. It began with the Italian Jesuit missionary Marcello Mastrolia. Before he could travel to the Far East, Mastrolia was gravely injured in a freak accident after a festive celebration dedicated to the Immaculate Conception in Naples. Delirious and on the verge of death, Mastrolia saw Xavier, who he later said asked him to choose between traveling or death by holding the respective symbols, to which Mastrolia answered, "I choose that which God wills." Upon regaining his health, Mastrolia made his way via Goa and the Philippines to Satsuma, Japan. The Tokugawa shogunate beheaded the missionary in October 1637, after undergoing 3 days of tortures involving the volcanic sulfurous fumes from Mount Unzen, known as the Hellmouth or pit, that had supposedly caused an earlier missionary to renounce his faith. Legacy. St. Francis Xavier is noteworthy for his missionary work, both as organizer and as pioneer, reputed to have converted more people than anyone else has done since St. Paul. Pope Benedict XVI said of both Ignatius of Loyola and Francis Xavier, not only their history, which was interwoven for many years from Paris and Rome, but a unique desire, a unique passion. It could be said moved and sustained them through different human events, the passion to give to God Trinity a glory always greater and to work for the proclamation of the gospel of Christ to the peoples who had been ignored. By consulting with the earlier ancient Christians of St. Thomas in India, Xavier developed Jesuit missionary methods. His success also spurred many Europeans to join the order, as well as become missionaries throughout the world. His personal efforts most affected Christians in India and the East Indies. India still has numerous Jesuit missions, and many more schools. Xavier also worked to propagate Christianity in China and Japan. However, following the persecutions of Damo Toyotomi Hideyoshi and the subsequent closing of the Japanese Empire to foreigners, the Christians of Japan were forced to go underground to develop an independent Christian culture. Likewise, while Xavier inspired many missionaries to the Empire of China, Chinese Christians also were forced underground and developed their own Christian culture. Francis Xavier is the patron saint of his native Navarre, which celebrates his feast day on December 3 as a government holiday. In addition to Roman Catholic masses remembering Xavier on the day, celebrations in the surrounding weeks honor the region's cultural heritage. Furthermore, in the 1940s, devoted Catholics instituted the Javarada, an annual day-long pilgrimage from the capital at Pamplona to Xavier, where his order has built a basilica and museum and restored his family's castle. Namesake, as the foremost saint from Navarre and one of the main Jesuit saints, he is much venerated in Spain and the Hispanic countries where Francisco Javier or Javier are common male given names. The alternative spelling Xavier is also popular in Portugal, Catalonia, Brazil, France, Belgium, and southern Italy. In India, the spelling Xavier is almost always used, and the name is quite common among Christians, especially in Goa and the southern states of Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Karnataka. The names Francisco Xavier, Anticubnio Xavier, Joe Pound O Xavier, Catano Xavier, Domingo Xavier etc., were very common till quite recently in Goa. In Austria and Bavaria the name is spelled as Xavier and often used in addition to Francis as Franz Xavier, Frantice Xavier. Many Catalan men are named for him, often using the two-name combination Franz Xavier. In English-speaking countries, Xavier until recently was likely to follow Francis. In the 2000s, however, Xavier by itself has become more popular than Francis, and since 2001 is now one of the 100 most common male baby names in the USA. Furthermore, the Xavier family name, possibly most famous in the United States for John Sevier, originated from the name Xavier. Many churches all over the world, often founded by Jesuits, have been named in honor of Xavier. Those in the United States include the historic St. Francis Xavier Shrine at Warwick, Maryland, and cousin to the first American-born Bishop John Carroll Bishop and later Archbishop of Baltimore, 1790 to 1815, began their education. Also the American Educational Teaching Order Xavier and Brothers, the Basilica of St. Francis Xavier in Diesville, Iowa, and the Mission San Xavier del Bac in Tucson, Arizona. In art, Rubens painted St. Francis Xavier raising the dead, for a Jesuit church in Antwerp, and in which he depicted one of St. Francis' many miracles. Missionary, shortly before leaving he had issued a famous instruction to Father Gaspar Barresias, who was leaving to go to Ormuz, that he should mix with sinners. And if you wish to bring forth much fruit, both for yourself and for your neighbors, and to live consoled, converse with sinners, making them unburden themselves to you. These are the living books by which you are to study, both for your preaching and for your own consolation. I do not say that you should not on occasion read written books to support what you say against vices with authorities from the Holy Scriptures and examples from the lives of the saints. Modern scholars place the number of people converted to Christianity by Francis Xavier around 30,000. And while some of Xavier's methods have been since criticized, he has also earned praise. He insisted that missionaries adapt to many of the customs, and most certainly the language, of the culture they wish to evangelize. And unlike later missionaries, Xavier supported an educated native clergy. Though for a time, it seemed his work in Japan was subsequently destroyed by persecution, Protestant missionaries 3 centuries later discovered that approximately 100,000 Christians still practiced in the Nagasaki area. Francis Xavier's work initiated permanent change in eastern Indonesia, and he was known as the Apostle of the Indies, where in 1546–1547 he worked in the Maluku Islands among the people of Ambon, Ternate, and Morotai, and laid the foundations for a permanent mission. After he left the Maluku Islands, others carried on his work, and by the 1560s there were 10,000 Roman Catholics in the area, mostly on Ambon. By the 1590s there were 50,000 to 60,000. Role in the Goya Inquisition. The Goya Inquisition was the office of the Portuguese Inquisition acting in Portuguese India, and in the rest of the Portuguese Empire in Asia. It was established in 1560, briefly suppressed from 1774–1778, and finally abolished in 1812. The Inquisition was established to punish apostate New Christians Jews and Muslims who converted to Catholicism, as well as their descendants who are now suspected of practicing their ancestral religion in secret. Many of these Cristianos Nuevos had been forcibly converted during the medieval era with incentives like rice donations for the poor, good positions in the Portuguese colonies for the middle class, and military support for local rulers. Many newly converted Indians were opportunistic rice Christians, who still practiced their old religion. Jews, in particular, had fled in large numbers to the new colonies of Africa, South America and Asia, where they had become the dominant mercantile community. In addition, the Inquisition prosecuted non-converts who broke prohibitions against the observance of Hindu or Muslim rites or interfered with Portuguese attempts to convert non-Christians to Catholicism. Priests considered this a threat to the purity of Christian belief. Written histories of Goa are rife with accounts of atrocities committed by the Goa Inquisition. Based on the records that survive, H. P. Salomon and I. S. D. Sassoon state that between the Inquisition's beginning in 1561 and its temporary abolition in 1774, some 16,202 persons were brought to trial by the Inquisition. Of this number, it is known that 57 were sentenced to death and executed. Another 64 were burned in effigy. Others were subjected to lesser punishments or penance, but the fate of many of those tried by the Inquisition is unknown. The role of Francis Xavier in the Goa Inquisition is controversial. He had written to King João III of Portugal in 1546, encouraging him to dispatch the Inquisition to Goa, which he did many years later in 1560. Francis Xavier passed away in 1552 without living to see the horrors of the Goa Inquisition, but some historians believe that he was aware of the Portuguese Inquisition's brutality. In an interview to an Indian newspaper, historian Chiota Cubnio de Souza stated that Francis Xavier and Sima Paundo Rodrigues, another founder member of the Society of Jesus, were together in Lisbon before Francis left for India. Both were asked to assist spiritually the prisoners of the Inquisition and were present at the very first Auto da Fé copyright celebrated in Portugal in September 1540, at which 23 were absolved and 2 were condemned to be burnt, including a French cleric. Hence he believes that Francis Xavier could not have been unaware of the brutality of the Inquisition. Fictional, The Route to the Orient is a book and CD collection, telling the story of Xavier missionary travels to China. See also, List of Catholic saints, Christianity in Indonesia, Catholicism in Indonesia, Jesuit China missions, Catholicism in China, Christianity in China, Xaverian Brothers Religious Order in America, Xavier School Ayura Manila, Philippines, Xavier University, Ateneo de Cagayan. Cagayan de Oro, Philippines, History of Roman Catholicism in Japan, Goa Inquisition, List of Westerners who visited Japan before 1868, footnotes. References. This article incorporates material from the Schaff-Herzog Encyclopedia of Religion, Atwater, Donald. A Dictionary of Saints. Penguin Books, Middlesex, England. Reprint, 1981. Jew, Albert. The Saint on a Mission. Anand Press, Anand, India. Pinch, William R., The Corpse and Cult of Saint Francis Xavier, 1552–1623, in Matthew N. Schmaltz and Peter Gottschalk ed. Engaging South Asian Religions, Boundaries, Appropriations, and Resistances, External Links, Basilica of Bom Jesus, Old Goa. The Shrine of Saint Francis Xavier, The Life of Saint Francis Xavier, The Life and Letters of Saint Francis Xavier. Francis Xavier, Saint, 1506–1552. Coleridge, Henry James, 1822–1893. London, Burns and Oates, Saint Francis Section Wal Xavier, Picture of Shangchuan Island. The chapel marks the location of his death. The Miracles of Saint Francis Xavier by John Harden, S.J., Brief History of Saint Francis Xavier.